Well, hello there, everybody, and welcome to live programming here at the More Freedom Foundation. Unlike normally, I do not have a particularly involved presentation. I think I'm just going to riff for a bit, and then I'm going to answer any questions you may have about what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now, what's happening, what's happening to my country, the United States, and what impact this may have on the world. I've got a couple things to say that are worth saying that you might not be hearing elsewhere. But I think most importantly, the main thing that I want to do today with this live presentation is make sure that we emphasize how connected these events are to foreign policy, to the world in general, and to the US role in the world. Because I do not believe that we would have gotten to this embarrassing, humiliating point as a country if it weren't for US foreign policy over the past 20 years. And I'm beginning to see the sort of thing on Twitter. Thankfully, I think that I haven't seen a ton of blaming Russia yet. That is sure to come in the coming days, blaming Russia for this, which is, of course, absurd. But I'm already seeing people say, ooh, what's going to happen? How dare Trump do this? Our allies are going to take advantage. So people are already using this as an excuse for more fear and more anger and more rage against different countries, when I assure you this is all about what the United States has done to itself. The other countries are sort of involved as supporting players, if that, usually mostly as objects that are acted upon, frequently violently. So that's the main thing that I want to get across right here. Like, this is a result of US foreign policy. If you're new here, there is a live chat. You are encouraged to listen to Logo Cool Extreme. He is the moderator of the live chat. I'm going to riff on a couple topics, and then we're just going to talk about what happened today. First off, what happened today? The final step in the establishment of Joe Biden as the president of the final step takes place on January 20th when he is sworn in. There is a minor sort of symbolic step where the Congress accepts all of the electoral votes that have been certified by the states. That was intended to happen today. I think will probably end up happening this evening. But I think it's important to emphasize, for the ridiculousness of what happened today, is it's not a particularly important step. There is not, despite what many media outlets have been putting forward, any opportunity for the result to be changed. I think that people say, well, if the Republicans had controlled the House and the Senate, then, we would have, Trump would have thrown out the vote entirely. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think what we have now is Republicans not having power over the process, and doing protest votes for sort of political reasons, knowing that, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, knowing that it wouldn't have any impact. It was never going to have any impact on the result. Joe Biden was always going to be president on January 20th. But what Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley have helped to create, that they did not intend, was the spectacle that we all saw unfolding on our television screens for me this afternoon as I was, enjoying a large Italian sandwich. It's pretty mind-boggling. It's the kind of footage, and it's interesting because I think you hear this a lot, see this a lot in reactions on Twitter, on CNN, on the news. It looks like something that happens in a third world country. It looks like something that should never happen here. Which leaves, prompts a couple thoughts. This is the sort of thing that happens often in a third world country because the United States makes it happen, especially often in the past 20 years. That's not to say that protest movements are illegitimate. I certainly wouldn't say that. I'm a big fan of Black Lives Matter. I've marched against, folks before in my time. But this sort of thing happens in the world, and the United States really often makes it happen. And it just seems like the height of arrogance to sort of stand up there and be like, oh, this is a third world thing. What this is is a result of the United States spending way too much time sticking its nose into other people's business. This may seem sort of surprising for most people because most people in the United States, because most people in the United States are sort of laser focused on our own politics. It's all we really care about. And foreign policy, in the minds of most Americans, and unfortunately in practical political effect, is just a sideshow to these sort of domestic political interests that we're so obsessed with. But the behind that, there is a vast machinery of U.S. government and uh, U.S. corporations, U.S. Actors that dump an incredible amount of money into this absurdly involved foreign policy and do a number of things without accountability. What's interesting is just the way that all of this sort of comes to, I really do believe, to sort of a peak today, just watching the executive branch of the United States calling together a mob of people who have been conditioned for 20 years to hate difference, to fear the other, to be terrified of things, people of color, liberals, anything, be terrified of all these things because they're meant to be threatening. Like that is the war on terror in effect. And the executive branch taking this incredible ball of hate and throwing it at the legislative branch, the United States Congress, an institution that, according to the U.S. Constitution, is supposed to be a very impressive part of the U.S. government. It's been a while since my constitutional law courses. I may be incorrect in saying that the legislative branch is supposed to be the most powerful element in the United States government. It's checks and balances. It's this, that, and the other thing. But over the course of really throughout the 20th century, but especially in the past 20 or 30 years, we've watched that legislative branch become a more ossified shadow of itself. And to see an executive branch with so much contempt for the Congress that he would send a mob to, and let's be clear here, this is what happened. Donald Trump gave a speech, and at the end of it, said, "Go for it." And after that speech, this mob went to Congress so quickly that this is one of, I think, the most misunderstood aspects of what happened today. So quickly that the U.S. Capitol Police couldn't stop it in time, and that the situation had already gotten so out of hand that the U.S. Capitol Police couldn't handle it. And I think what normally happens when the U.S. Capitol Police can't handle something, or it looks like there's a situation they can't handle, is they call in the DC police. However, by the time it was clear, and it developed very quickly, by the time it was clear that things were falling apart at the US Capitol today, the mob was already there. The US Capitol Police is the only law enforcement agency that reports directly to the US Congress. And as with everything else that involves the U.S. Congress, it is underfunded and inadequate to the task, as we saw here. And it's just extraordinary to just sort of watch this instantiation of my belief of what has been happening to the U.S. federal government over the past century, just sort of acted out in front of you. People wonder why it is absolutely true that all security services, all law enforcement officials have treated these thugs down in Washington, D.C. today differently and treated them with kid gloves, been very friendly and easy on them because they are white people rather than people of color or leftists. That is absolutely true. However, you should also know when you see those pictures looking at the Lincoln Memorial during the Black Lives Matter protests, when they had all those ridiculous stormtroopers without insignia ready to bash heads, that is a different part of the U.S. government. The U.S. Capitol Police are the rinky-dink folks who are probably well prepared if some lone gunman tries to come and storm the Capitol. I think they probably deal with that a couple times a year or a couple times a decade. They're well prepared for that. But I would be surprised if they have a particularly developed, well, I think it was demonstrated today that they do not have a particularly developed ability to to face crowd control. They're just not prepared for it. The DC police are prepared for that. So actually, I think that that might be a common question. Like the idea that there's going to be like, this is actually gonna, this is it. This is the coup. I called this the Trump coup because I knew it would get clicks. This video, but no, like this is an embarrassment. This is a humiliation. This is the United States looking like garbage, and it's not. I think it's bad to say that we look like a banana republic. This should happen in Africa. Da, da, da. No, that's horse shit. Like this is something we did to ourselves through our own ripping down of our system, and it is especially humiliating, vastly more humiliating than it would be. Something like this happened in Mali, or something more extreme than this, because it actually resulted in a change in government. It is vastly more, much more humiliating for this to happen, for something like this to happen in the United States, because we are infinitely is correct, but we are vastly richer than a country in the developing world who has a similar situation. We are vastly richer. We have had centuries of vastly higher opportunities, and we adore setting ourselves up on a pedestal and telling everybody else how their democracy should run and how this da 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 da. And this is absolutely, in that sense, this is the war on terror coming home to roost. Because this idea, when I think of the war on terror, I don't think specifically of efforts to go after Al Qaeda, because that was never what the war on terror was about. I think of just generally the huge arc of U.S. foreign policy since 2001, which is basically us going everywhere, using this terrorist event that happened as an excuse to get more involved everywhere in the world and tell more and more people what to do. And interestingly, instead of going after Saudi Arabia, the people who were most responsible for 9/11, we used 9/11 as an excuse to take out and attack Saudi Arabia's enemies, often using Al Qaeda as allies. When I say war on terror, I'm not talking about the fight against Al Qaeda, because that doesn't exist, but I'm talking about the whole past era, 20 years of foreign policy. So when I talk about Trump's coup, when I talk about the disaster that is Donald Trump, I'm talking about the whole past 4 years. I'm talking about the very extraordinarily humiliating fact that Donald Trump was elected president of the United States in 2016. I'm seeing a lot of outrage on social media and horror, and that is completely appropriate because this is a horrifying, humiliating moment for my country to fall into. And I'm seeing a lot of outrage about this, but your outrage, the second Donald Trump looked like he was going to win an election, that should have been an indication that something was desperately wrong with this country, and that was an indication for me. So I'm while I am of course appalled by what's going on in Washington D.C., I'm a lot less surprised. I think I am surprised. I mean, I think yesterday I was beginning to realize, okay, something crappy is going to happen, but I'm not shocked, and this is not some new horror. This is a continuation and a logical progression from the horror of the fact that Donald Trump was president. And what's incredibly frustrating to me, and I'm seeing on Twitter, and I think it was really prompted me to go live angry, which may or may not have been a thing, is that people are trying to look at this Trump phenomenon as if it's something separate from our foreign policy, or even to go all the other way. It's a vindication of our foreign policy. It's saying, well, you see, because Trump happened, it means we should be even more serious about Russia. Trump is something that happened because of extraordinary U.S. neglect of its own politics, of its own people, of its own economy, of its own issues. And it infuriates me to no end. Specifically, I think I retweeted it with more profanity than I should have on Twitter. I think it's Admiral Stavridis. He's a former admiral who's becoming a national security talking head for some reason, trying to say that this is what are Russia and China going to do here? How are they going to take advantage of this? How can we think more? How can we continue to look more outward and look for more demons to slay abroad? Quincy Institute. How can we look for more problems abroad to desperately avoid looking at our own problems? In 2016, we should have decided as a country, oh my God, like we need to focus at home. Not America first is obviously a horrifying slogan with roots in fascism and Charles Win Lindbergh, all that. But yeah, we should have been like, hey, yeah, let's focus in. Let's figure out how this atrocity happened, how Donald Trump got elected, and fix the problems internally that made that happen. And what's incredibly infuriating is that over the past 4 years, we have seen a lot of the same people who created the horror show of the outward focused United States and its incredibly failed war on terror initiatives. We've seen people like Admiral Stavridis or David Frum or James Comey, these people who are responsible for this, our leadership, our elites who are responsible for this extraordinary neglect that allowed Donald Trump to come to power. They're saying, no, we need to be even more outside focused. Screw this war on terror. That justification obviously isn't working because we like to work with Al Qaeda in Syria and Yemen. Let's go with the politics that led up to World War I. That's what we need. We need great power competition. We need great power competition. That's going to make things better. We're gonna go after China and Russia harder. We're going to do what we can to build a multipolar world of competition that can bring us another world war, because it'll make us seem smart and it'll allow us to focus on the things we want to focus on. And one of the horrors of the Trump administration is that this switch, this isn't some conspiracy theory I'm touting here, this is a switch that's in a document called the 2018 US Defense Strategy. And it's extraordinary to me that this mindset has, even after it has brought us to this disastrous crossroads, there are still people out there who are like, oh, we need to be more focused on Russia. It's Russia's fault. No, it is not Russia's fault. It is our fault. There are a lot of things at the root of Donald Trump. I think there's, on Twitter, there's a lot of people like, oh, I guess this doesn't look like economic insecurity, whenever they take a picture of somebody racist looking from a protest. And the thing is, it's all of these things. It is, the roots of the support of Trump are racism. The roots of the support of Trump are economic problems. There are obviously areas that have been neglected and falling apart. I firmly believe that, post-Trump, it's not like Ohio or the rest of the Rust Belt is going to go rampaging back to the Democrats. No, they're going to continue to be angry. And some of that anger will be very racist. The country has been falling apart. That is why Trump was allowed to rise. And yes, of course, this has extreme racist elements, but those extreme racist elements, you have to realize, were consciously created by the US government in furtherance of the war on terror. That's the most infuriating thing of people like David Frum, who wrote The Axis of Evil speech, or James Comey, the guy who both popularized the idea of the Ferguson effect, saying that rising murder is Black Lives Matter problem, and was the guy most responsible for saying it's impossible to say that a Syrian refugee isn't a terrorist. I mean, these people are now setting themselves up as anti-racist. Are you fucking kidding me? It's the war on terror, people. And the you can see it, it's quite, I mean, it's rarely that direct, but you can see, if you pay a little attention, the funding from the US government to institutions that put forward Islamophobia, put forward racist panic about the border, put forward. So these fucks who mainlined this racism, this insanity about Muslims, about Mexicans, about this, that, and the other thing, and profited from it electorally for 15, 20 years, are trying to set themselves up by resistance heroes because they want us to blame Russia for Trump. I think I might be getting a little off topic here, but I think I'll stop my rant and start answering questions by just the thing that strikes me the most, sitting in my parents' kitchen, looking at the US Capitol building surrounded by folks I do not agree with politically, and invading the place, breaking windows, rampaging through the halls. My understanding is that there's been gunfire and at least one death. The fact that this was happening, all I could think of was how many times I've seen footage like that um, dealing with another country, and how many times that footage has been the responsibility of my country. Now, I'm not saying I'm not going to go full on, crazy pants here. I'm not saying that there weren't real, dedicated, serious people. There absolutely were real, dedicated, serious people who wanted to overthrow Assad in Syria. They had really real grievances. There are real, serious, dedicated people who wanted to overthrow Yanukovych in Ukraine. They had real grievances. There were real, serious people with real grievances against Gaddafi in Libya. There absolutely were. There absolutely were. But the US government came in and took those legitimate grievances and turned them into ways to destroy the country. Libya and Syria, quite obviously. Ukraine has not yet been, completely destroyed, but it has been dismembered because the United States decided to take some of those legitimate grievances and turn them into the overthrow of an elected president. So I see all that, and yeah, I'm conscious that these people had legitimate grievances, but the United States turned those into country destroying things. And as I stand and watch on television as my Capitol building is occupied by people that I disagree with, I believe are desperately misled and certainly racist. You know what? A lot of people think they have legitimate grievances. And you know what? A much higher percentage of my country thinks those people have legitimate grievances than the percentage of Syrians that thought the anti-Assad rebels had legitimate grievances, or the percentage of Ukrainians that thought the Maidan people had legitimate anti-Yanukovych grievances. So I'm just thinking to myself how goddamn lucky the United States is that there isn't another United States out there that's more powerful that could decide that these protesters that rioters that nominally represent half of the country or much of half of the country, we're just really lucky that there isn't another United States out there to decide that it's in its interest to use those rioters to destabilize my country. And I think like that level of humility, I think, is something that we should incorporate. All right, who's got questions? That was a lot of anger. Does anybody have any questions? I'm happy to do Q&A. I'm happy to talk about things. I just ranting so much. What's interesting, I guess I'll speak briefly to the idea that people will might have that this is like a legitimate coup that's going to go somewhere. What's fascinating has been like, so where are the Congress people actually? There are some Congress people doing TV interviews now, but I think the Congress is all sort of in the same place. And I think they're probably going to finish the business that they set themselves today. I think quite possibly the Capitol Police that failed so miserably in safeguarding the symbols of our democracy might actually have done a fairly decent job safeguarding the actual living, functioning members of our democracy. I believe the legislature, the legislators are in a secure area. I have theories about where that might be, but I believe they are all together. I also believe Mike Pence is there, which of course presents rather a tantalizing possibility. I think it would be too much to hope for, but I think there's a distinct possibility that the U.S. Congress and Mike Pence together, they've got everybody they need to do. They need to put together some articles of impeachment, vote on them, and enact them. And I would argue that even many Republicans at this point, beyond Mitt Romney, would agree that Donald Trump is worth impeaching and removing at this point. So it is a distinct possibility that Joe Biden will not, in fact, be the 46th president of the United States. He might be the 47th. It's a possibility. I haven't looked into that maybe too much. Maybe Article 24 or Article 23 or whatever the hell it is a better option. Or people could just decide, the Republicans could just chicken out and not do that. Regardless, the whatever symbolic steps need to be taken for the Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College will occur within the next day or two, and Joe Biden will be president on January 20th. What's interesting to me, and I think I would be completely justified and an appropriate thing to do, would the Congress and Pence together decide that Mike Pence should be president for the next 20 days. I think that's a distinct possibility. Of course, you know, the Republican Party today, I mean, could you trust Mike Pence to not, you know, find some precedent that states that he should be president for a little bit longer? I don't know. But that gets a little too far into speculation. But yeah, and yet the Congress, I think, I would hope actually that this sort of experience together of this Congress, that's kind of an interesting thing. I guess so. This is what the 217th Congress. I don't know what the appropriate number is. But you know, they do Congresses in 2-year intervals because the House of Representatives changes every 2 years. Senate in staggered, it's each senator has 6-year terms. But so they refer to so it's like, oh, sorry, so it's not 200, it's like the 117th or something like that. So this 100th Congress has certainly had an interesting way to begin its time together. So who knows? Maybe this could inspire a little esprit de corps and a little, you know, having the executive branch literally throw a mob at them might inspire this Congress to have a little self-respect and start taking a little power back from the executive branch, not just, you know, Donald Trump, but the executive branch going forward. I think that's something that anybody would be happy and proud to see. All right. Questions. Nikolaj Thyssen asks, do you think there will be trouble at the inauguration? Will there be an inauguration? Sorry, there absolutely will be an inauguration of Joe Biden. But in 2 weeks, we've probably got hyper COVID going even stronger, and a real threat from the obviously very threatening people who occupied the U.S. Capitol building today. So I would wonder actually if, I mean, there will be an inauguration. Joe Biden will be out on January 20th. All the dignitaries will be there, sitting very far apart from each other. And maybe there won't be a crowd, you know, which Donald Trump, you know, he does have that. He will almost certainly have a much larger inauguration crowd than Joe Biden. Because I think at this point, I think actually this would probably provide an excuse to do something that they should have done anyway for public health purposes, which is to simply not have an inauguration crowd, which is a shame. But I think that's probably, you know, the safest approach, both for COVID purposes and for, you know, not having pipe bombs situations. Local Cool Extreme says, is there precedent for this on a state level in the United States? I am not enough of a scholar of U.S. state history. My understanding is that there were, towards the end of Reconstruction, also sort of eerie parallels. It was the last time there was a, well, no, this is not a time. You have to avoid falling into this Republican broke brain mindset when you're like, oh, this is a contested election. This is not a contested election. This is an election where all the states have certified their votes. It is all in. We know who won. We know who won the popular vote. More importantly, we know who won the Electoral College. Because Donald Trump and a lot of other principle-free, incredibly shitty people in the Republican Senate and media ecosphere have pretended there was some kind of instability. You know, they're tricking people into calling this a contested election. It is not. But the people who want it to be a contested election, they go back to, I believe it was 1876, when Samuel Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes ran against each other. I believe Tilden, the Democrat, won the popular vote, but it was contested. I think there were problems in a number of states, and there was difficulty. It was hard to. It was a problem, and what happened was the Democrats, who were the party of the South at that point, made a deal saying, "Tell you what, we'll let the Republican be president as long as Reconstruction ends." And when Reconstruction ended, that was the period for about 15, well, I guess 1876, yeah, for about what, 1876? Gosh darn. Anyway, it was a decade or so after the Civil War, when the North controlled the South and attempted to build up a more just place to make sure that the recently freed slaves wouldn't be instantly re-enslaved. Some freed slaves, probably I would imagine mostly folks who had already been free African Americans, got into the U.S. Congress, got into the government of these states. And after that deal, which makes it especially horrific that Republicans are looking to that deal as like something great, after that deal was made, and the Northern soldiers left those Southern states, my understanding is that those governments with African Americans in them in the South were forcibly removed. I haven't read, this is from reading from years back. But yeah, as far as, is that what you're talking about for a state precedent? Dan T asks, More Freedom Foundation, do you think U.S. will slow down the aggressive foreign policy because of Biden, since any other front will be unpopular and the problems at home? Unfortunately, no, I don't think that the United States will slow down its aggressive foreign policy unless we make them. We in the United States have extraordinary levels of power. The fact that Donald Trump became president is horrifying. But what it also illustrates is that people who are not the choice of the establishment, who do not believe establishment things, can become president. I don't obviously don't want another Donald Trump to be president, but I do believe that the U.S. people have all the tools they need within our current system to make this country a better, smarter place. The first step, I believe, in doing that would be to end all these idiotic foreign adventures. Beyond the fact that sort of the war on terror led to this extraordinary neglect of U.S. politics, the U.S. country, U.S. economy, whatnot. Besides that, if you think about Donald Trump's victory in 2016, it was by a tremendously small margin. And I guarantee you that if it weren't for the Islamic State, which is something that only exists because of U.S. policy in Syria, because the U.S. government intentionally opened up a free space in Syria for jihadists to come in and fight Assad. That's why the Islamic State became as powerful as it did. It has a longer history, of course, but that's the reason the Islamic State was able to build a territorial caliphate, is because the Obama administration created the open space for them in Syria. So that Islamic State, just the latest and most obvious of the idiotic things that the idiotic U.S. foreign policy produces. If it weren't for the Islamic State, Donald Trump would never have been president. It's hard to remember now because it was a flash in the pan that has evaporated. Ironically, after Donald Trump stopped funding the Syrian rebels. It's amazing how quickly, when U.S. funding for the Syrian rebels dried up, the Islamic State just disappeared. Weird that. Anyway, it's weird now to remember how dominant the Islamic State was in everybody's minds. But in 2015, 2016, this was a huge, big, terrible threat that had been, of course, completely manufactured by the United States inadvertently. But that was tremendously dominant on people's minds. And this Islamic State thing was tremendously embarrassing, obviously, for Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration. And Donald Trump made great strides with it. So I think the first step to improving the United States is saving those trillions of dollars. We have a national debt that is $26 trillion or something right now, up from 23 just last year. Of those $26 trillion, like $7 trillion of that is foreign policy post 2011. All manner of useless bullshit 1 trillion of that, the math here doesn't exactly play out, but over, its lifetime, 1 trillion of that, like a 27th of the debt, is one fighter jet program for a fighter jet that doesn't fucking work. So the first step, I think, to improving the United States, making a more sensible place, is to get out of the business of manufacturing things to hate, that people like Donald Trump can profit off of and come into power with. You remember the Muslim ban? That thing that was so horrifying, that was very popular with a lot of people in the United States. There's no way that Donald Trump could have gotten popularity and votes off of a Muslim ban if it weren't for the policies that much more upstanding Islam as a religious of peace people like George W. Bush and Barack Obama put forward. So yeah, like, we need to focus on ourselves. We need to use the money we spend. And it's funny because people get so angry about the foreign aid budget, which is like, I don't know, like $150 million to that country, $150 million to that country. $150 million, like, isn't that like a single fighter jet? Like, no, people just can't wrap their heads around how much goddamn money we spend on U.S. defense, and look at what that has yielded for us in 2020 and the beginning of 2021. We spend almost $1 trillion. And keep in mind, of course, we officially put $750 million into the defense budget every year, but we don't actually pay for it. We pay for that with debt. So it's kind of like a mortgage, really. So like, we pay easily $1 trillion on defense money every year, and we don't even know where it goes. And it all of that money put out there, and we were absolutely brought to our knees by a little disease. And how much money do we put into epidemic defense? Pennies. I think in the National Institutes of Health, the organization that funds all medical research throughout the country, like everything, is responsible for cancer, is responsible for things that kill every American that dies, except for those 2,000 back in 2001. Like millions of Americans a year die of things that the National Institutes of Health is supposed to work on. And the National Institutes for Health have got like maybe, half as much money as the fucking Defense Department, that basically just goes around and destroys things and makes things worse. Created Al-Qaeda, created the Islamic State, turned Russia into a rogue state, turned China into a rogue state. It's just, I find it infuriating. So yeah, I think the first best thing for the United States would be for all of us to force the Joe Biden administration to stop these forever wars and to figure out what the hell is going on. How did we get to a point? How in God's name did we get to a point where you have people more or less supported by, say, 40% of the country invading the Capitol and potentially shooting at the people's representatives? It's just extraordinary. Sorry, I see James C. Nicola. There was a super chat. James, you have a question? Folks can make donations. I'm here to profit off of my country's pain. James C. Nicola, if you got a question, ask it. Petros Hula Hula says Trump was a non-interventionist, which is utter horseshit. Utter horseshit. I've got a video called The Syria Withdrawal Hoax. I suggest you all take a look at that. Donald Trump managed not to start any new wars, mostly because he didn't have the capacity to do it. But what he did do was he dramatically stepped up the level of violence in every single one of our ongoing wars. In Somalia, in Yemen, in Afghanistan, we are killing people at a much larger scale. Remember, he was so proud that he had the mother of all bombs. Do you remember that? We have got the biggest conventional bomb. Donald Trump was so excited to drop the mother of all bombs at the cost of, I don't know, 100 million, no, I don't know, X tens of millions of dollars on some doofuses in caves in Afghanistan. Yeah, the idea that Trump was a non-interventionist is some horseshit. He assassinated the #2 guy in the Iranian government this time last year. Yeah, I have little. Sorry, Petros. I have little truck with the idea that he was not an interventionist. Sam SHS More Freedom Foundation. There are already 3 resignations in the White House today. Do you think more cabinet members and staffers will resign after the shameful display in the Capitol? I mean, probably, but fuck those people. Honestly, like they stuck with that for 4 years. I'm sorry. I need to use less profanity. I need to be less unhinged. Yeah, those people suck. Yeah, the people who are resigning now from the Trump administration, I mean, gosh, okay, sure, welcome aboard, join the resistance. But yeah, the idea that these people want some kind of kudos for it. The most amazing thing was Bill Barr, the Attorney General, who has spent quite a lot of time. The Attorney General who spent a whole bunch of time covering up for Trump, basically desperately. You know, this is like a real attorney, a guy who's been covering up for Republican presidents for his entire professional career, came in and wanted to, cover up crimes for Trump. But of course, Trump was just too bad a client. But what's interesting was, Bill Barr, who resigned, I want to say 2 or 3 weeks ago, coming out with really, I'm so enraged, and Fox News, of course, because Bill Barr is definitely very much part of that whole circle that runs Fox News, was careful to, like, every 10 to 15 minutes they were running Bill Barr. Oh, I just want to say that the old Attorney General Bill Barr is condemning this really strongly, and to which I say, well, great, welcome aboard. You don't want to murder, you don't want to actually murder, the U.S. political system. Yippee! Congrats, that's fantastic. Kudos. But if you couldn't see what was coming with Donald Trump, the second, long before he rode down that escalator in 2015 to announce his candidacy. If you couldn't see that, if you couldn't see that initially, fine. You're angry. I have sympathy for Trump supporters sometimes, not so much today. But for the politicians, the amoral fucks who decided to, hitch their wagon to Donald Trump and profit from it, I have no sympathy for that. Sorry, especially not today. BSSC leaves me a super chat just to say nice things. Well, thank you. That's a very friendly gift. So that's BSSC. Do you have a question? And there was another super chat from Inonu. Will Trump flee the country? Also, where I would be surprised if Trump fled the country. The question of prosecuting Trump is, how do you prosecute him? Actually, today, that's a different question, isn't it? Because, yeah, I would say there's a number of things that you can prosecute a former president for, again, it's just extraordinary, for sending a mob against the U.S. Congress. It's extraordinary. So yeah, I mean, I used to be pretty anti the idea of prosecuting Trump. He is someone who was elected by a lot of Americans who are super invested in him. Prosecuting Trump's henchmen, I'm totally fine with. I've always been on board with. I would love to prosecute people in Trump's family. But yeah, the idea of sort of arresting a head of state and arresting, I think it was a Chapo Trap House I was listening to. It's like, I think you're sort of pointing out, it's like the point of a U.S. president or sort of a head of state anywhere is sort of to do crimes. And I don't think anybody who wants to be president wants to open the kettle of worms to, prosecuting a head of state, a U.S. head of state. Because, I mean, yeah, you could argue, well, I guess we could prosecute all the U.S. heads of state, but I feel like that probably wouldn't fly. But I got to say, like, some of the specific, really obvious things that he's been doing, the phone call with do you remember 2 days ago? Was that yesterday when that phone call with the Georgia Secretary of State seemed really out of line? Well, Trump is amazing at sort of one-upping himself. So I don't know. I think it's a little too. The question of whether or not Trump will be prosecuted is it's a technical question. Like you look at the Georgia thing, it's like, oh my God, it's like a mafia don trying to force this guy to invent votes. But if you actually listen to the excerpts of the call, it's like, no, like Donald Trump legitimately believes that there are votes to be found because they've been stolen from him. And I think that's actually a somewhat convincing defense. But it's been a long time since my crim law courses. I am not a practicing attorney. There are many people on Twitter who will parse that in greater detail. But I got to say, after today, every criminal justice system, we all claim that it's rule of law is not men, and it should be, to the greatest extent possible. But all legal systems absolutely have elements of politics at different levels in the sort of technology of how it works. And I've got to think there's some pretty pissed off people in the Department of Justice who are cooking up some doozies for Donald Trump. Will he flee the country? I don't know. That would certainly be that I don't think he would, because I haven't really thought about this much, but I think that Donald Trump fleeing the country would be such an undermining of his political position. I think that would, what if he actually went to Russia? How's that going to work? Honestly, who's going to want to take a fugitive U.S. president? Maybe Saudi Arabia, but no, of course not. Saudi, they're going to take Donald Trump to sit there and tweet nasty shit about Joe Biden, while Saudi Arabia relies on a U.S. security guarantee from Joe Biden. I don't think so. What is Russia's going to take Donald Trump and 100% prove all of the crazy, or appear to 100% prove all the craziest allegations of the Russia hoax? I don't know, maybe Poland, maybe? I don't know. It doesn't seem particularly practical to me. Yeah, exactly. Where do you go? So I don't know. And the thing is, Trump has got, before today, I would say that Trump had a lot of things going for him that would militate against him being arrested, because he was the president. He was voted in by a ton of people. He is delusional. He's legitimately lives in another reality. And if you do legitimately live in another reality, our legal system doesn't, if you act according to false beliefs, and you murder somebody, then we put you into a loony bin instead of holding you responsible for your crimes. In such a unique position as a completely irresponsible U.S. president, I can't think of another president that has been I think maybe Woodrow Wilson after his stroke. It's really hard for me to think of a president that has been as legitimately fucking delusional as President Trump. So he can, I think, has a convincing defense for a lot of the things that you could prosecute him for. But again, that was sort of before today. I haven't watched the speech. Twitter tells me that Donald Trump told his people to go get the Congress, go get the Capitol, do it, go wild. But if you actually watch I haven't watched the footage myself. I was just, like I said, I had driven my father to a doctor's appointment in the city, and was eating a sandwich when I noticed on Twitter that people had invaded the Capitol. So I'm sure on Twitter there are very involved legal discussions about what exactly is going on, what exactly anything means. But I can't really point to that. I do have to say that prior to today, I was kind of yeah, because he's got this political position, and the U.S. government going after Donald Trump, which it should, and probably will also have a whole bunch of political aspects to it, and will actually help him with his sort of demonology of the deep state and this sort of that sort of thing. That's why I think him fleeing the country is much less likely. because that would sort of undermine that whole political position he has. But yes, what happened today has completely undermined everything. So I don't know. It's a new game now, but it's just God. It's embarrassing. Anyway, there was another super chat here that I missed, wasn't there? Yeah. Weltarchive 4 says 42,920 votes from Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia, and Trump would have remained president. Biden won even closer than Trump in 2016. That's not true, actually. I don't believe that's true. Is it? Because he won. I mean, to do a direct comparison, you'd have to do a comparison of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Those were the really important states that Trump won, and I think he won that by less than 50,000 votes. And I think Biden won those three by something in the hundreds of thousands of votes. So I don't think that's true. I think, of course, it's, you can pick whichever states you want to choose with the smallest margins. So yeah, and Georgia was a state with an extraordinarily small margin, and Arizona. But you have to realize that actually, it's funny. A month ago, 2 months ago now, I was living in the map, and I could have told you exactly. But if I recall correctly, and that's why the whole idea of Trump going to the Supreme Court and winning doesn't make sense, because if there were one state where if one state flipped, Trump could have won. Like Trump would have had to have flipped, depending on which state it was, 3 or 4 states to win. Yeah, I think that's why it's always 4 states. So for Trump to win, he'd have to flip 4 states. So no, I disagree that Biden's win was narrower than Trump's win over Hillary. I don't think that's the case, really, on any fair metric that you would use. However, I very much take your point that, oh my God, we were way closer to Donald Trump being president than we should have. Like, way too close. And I 100% agree with that. And I think a lot of people use that as a case against the Electoral College. After being someone who was like, no, the Electoral College is a valued institution for a long time, I'm now on board. If you want to get rid, if somebody wants to amend the Constitution and get rid of the Electoral College, I am 100% for it. Go for it. Let's do it. Let's go nuts. Because yeah, the idea of Donald Trump winning the presidency again, with a deficit of 5 or 6 million votes behind the other guy, just real bad, real bad. So yeah, clearly the Electoral College is a very damaging institution, and I agree with you on that. If that was your point, but I think also the point should be, oh my God, enough people thought that Donald Trump was a good president and would be a good person to continue as president. And that, again, is a sign of just how screwed up this country is and how insane it is that so many people in Washington, D.C. still want to go out and fix the world and tell the world how to do things, when we've had Donald Trump here. It's just insane to me. It makes no sense. So yeah, I missed $5 super. Why do I always miss $5 super chat? What the hell is wrong with me, man? I'm sorry. Where is it? Where is $5 super chat? God damn, man. It's just something about, I don't know, $5, just that blue. Anyway, is the GOP done? How will they recover from this? Well, I have been arguing. I ran a video saying the Republican Party is dead in 2016, I think, before the election. And while, I guess most would consider that video to be wrong, I think it was actually kind of true. I mean, the Republican Party that I knew growing up and as a kid was dead. I think as soon as Trump became, their standard bearer. I think famously the 2020 party platform, at the conventions before the presidential election, the political parties, the Republicans, the Democrats, adopt a platform, which means it's a document. that lists, excuse me, that lists the positions of that party. It is the party's platform. They adopted that platform in 2016. There was a list of positions that were sort of traditional Republican Party positions, like being for cutting back entitlements. Donald Trump doesn't want to do that. A whole range of other things that Donald Trump wasn't interested in. And in 2020, they just didn't even bother. They were just like, our platform is whatever Trump wants to do. So the idea of the Republican Party of small government and uh, moral rectitude, or whatever the hell they claim to be for, it was debatable whether they ever really pursued those things, but they certainly aren't now. So yeah, I think the GOP that I knew, that I grew up with, died at some point in 2015. Um, as far as like the GOP, the Republicans as a successful political entity, I don't know, man. I think what's going to happen, I think, over the next decade is, I think in 2030, we're going to have a U.S. party called the Democrats. We're going to have a U.S. party called the Republicans. And they're going to be opposed to each other. They're probably going to call each other some of the same things, which would be kind of funny. But I think they're both going to represent completely different things from what they have historically represented and what they represent today. So I don't know if it makes sense to say the GOP is done. I don't know. I mean, the Trump family, I mean, what's interesting is that what happened in Georgia actually kind of indicated a position of strength for Donald Trump. I think the fact that the Republican Party got wiped out in Georgia historically. I mean, yeah, and it's actually quite sad, because today was really an extraordinarily happy day. Yesterday in Georgia, two Democrats um, became the two senators from Georgia, a old-fashioned, deep red state. Home of the Confederacy. Sherman had to march through there. It was a big deal that two Democrats won there. I mean, John Ossoff, who gives a shit? But the what was I saying? But Raphael Warnock is the pastor of Martin Luther King's church. And the idea that an African American pastor of Martin Luther King's church could be elected the senator from Georgia is a really extraordinary thing. I mean, how do I say this without sounding terribly racist? Barack Obama, absolutely our first African American president, and but I think there are elements to him. I think there are many conservative elements who put this much more. I'm trying to put this in a polite way. Actually, Joe Biden, there's a good way. There's a route into it. Famously said that Barack Obama, he's articulate. He's an African American who sounds good, or something like that. This idea that Barack Obama, his mother was white, and he's very sort of a traditional elite sort of African American looking fella, sort of pale, and went to all the right schools and has all the right degrees. Raphael Warnock is an extraordinarily well-educated person, but he is, I think, in ways that Barack Obama might not have been, was deeply, firmly rooted in the African American experience in ways that perhaps Barack Obama learned to be or married into. And to have, Raphael Warnock, I believe, went to Morehouse, went to other traditionally, the historically, HBCUs, what do we call them? It's the historically, and so to have a figure like Raphael Warnock, who, I've just watched a few campaign ads, seen him speak, seems like a great guy. But to have a figure who represents the things historically that Raphael Warnock does, to have him represent Georgia in the Senate is just an extraordinarily happy story about my country. I have no idea how I started talking about that, but I think it had something to do with just the incredible ferment. No, that had to do with the fact that Donald Trump seems to be kind of important to Republicans winning elections nowadays, because John Ossoff, a guy who who had narrowly lost to David Perdue back in what's the word? Back in November, and won this time without Trump on the ticket. There are a lot of Republican voters who don't show up when Donald Trump isn't on the ticket, or even worse, I think a lot of Republicans have got to be suspecting that they may not show up at all if Donald Trump tells them not to. So I think that the GOP might just, even after all this, get in line behind Trump. And I think that would lead to, of course, further disasters for the Republican Party. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to be a decade of ferment. Hold on to your butts. Yeah. Well, thank you for listening to me vent and be nuts for a little while here. I feel better. And honestly, like, I think an important thing to point out would be that I don't think we're going to be in a tremendous amount of trouble here. I don't think Donald Trump's going to be president on January 20th. I think this has been an absolutely lunatic day in U.S. history. It'll certainly be something we remember. I think the United States will survive this. I think it's important to remember that in many places it has nothing to do with the United States, but in too many places, too many countries have experienced a decade of days like this. I'm thinking specifically of Syria, Libya, Yemen. I think we should reflect as Americans, as US citizens, we should reflect on just how traumatic today has been, and imagine what it would be like to live in a country where it's been like this for 10 years. And I think we should look for ways to figure out how nobody in the world has to experience days like this. Fadel, I'll answer another Fadel question because I neglected his super chat and I feel bad about that. Will DC now get statehood now with the Democratic majority? I would say probably not. Yeah, my sense is not. I think there's folks who could make an argument that actually, this should be, that what happened today is an argument that DC should have a little more power and a little more independent weight. I don't really follow that argument, but I haven't tried to. Maybe that's a very good argument. I think that if what I expected, what most polling companies expected to happen in November had happened, if Donald Trump had gotten swept out, if there had been a landslide swing towards the Democrats, then yeah, I think DC statehood would have been on the table. Puerto Rico statehood is a lot more complicated because it's not entirely established that Puerto Rico wants statehood. But yeah, DC statehood, I think, would have been happening if that had happened. That did not happen. What we have now, thanks to this really great Democratic sweep in Georgia, I'm not, a Democrat, but I do like to have a government that can function. And that is what Joe Biden will be able to do. What Joe Biden will not be able to do is fix the healthcare system, fix the environment with a massive Green New Deal. He won't be able to do all of the crazy things that were promised, the big ticket things that were promised, because what he does is reliant on the choices of Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia, who some are exaggerating this, but I think it is true to say is now one of the most powerful people in the country. Joe Manchin is, what's the word I'm looking for here? Joe Manchin is a blue dog Democrat, is I think the way they used to be described. He's sort of a right-leaning Democrat. I don't think quite as conservative as the old blue dog Democrats used to be, but he is from West Virginia, a place that has a failing economy. And places with failing economies tend to vote Republican. So Joe Manchin, if he wants to hold on to his seat, has to be very conservative in his policies. So he's not going to destabilize the court. He's not going to support DC statehood. So, whether or not DC would become a state, well, that sort of depends on what Joe Manchin wants. So that's a very big shift that I think is one of those things that wasn't going to happen. I mean, is it possible that just the horror of Donald Trump throwing a mob at the legislative branch? It's still amazing that that happened. That maybe things will shift and it'll seem more possible, but I'd be surprised. I think people are going to be surprised at how fleeting the impact of this moment is, both in respect of the possibility of Trump becoming president, or Trump being entirely discredited. I bet Tucker Carlson is on right now. Wait, no, sometimes Tucker Carlson will usually wait 3 or 4 days. He's probably saying, gosh, really wish Trump's advisors hadn't made him do that, or gosh, these people are really embarrassing Donald Trump and or something like that. But 4 days from now, everything will sort of be back to normal on that front, I assume. Yeah, but I could be wrong. Maybe this is the day that everything gets better. All right. Probus asks, "Are you a socialist?" I am not a socialist. No, I am not a socialist. I would define myself as a conservative, generally pretty pro-business. Used to be like a huge Reaganite. Like, yeah, I was all like Ronald Reagan was awesome, saved this country, business, I gotta say, Donald Trump being elected changed that pretty dramatically. Because what Donald Trump is it's a sign that Ronald Reagan and his influence has been what has run the country for 40 years right now. He set the path. Obama and the Clintons were Reaganites. They were all about Reagan's politics. They were all about being pro-business, small government, yada, yada. That was the thing. And if after 40 years of that, we arrive at Donald Trump, then yeah, something's different. Like, am I a socialist? No, like I don't like the Democratic Socialists of America, or I do listen to Chapo Trap House because I really love that they just rip columnists to shreds. It's fun. It's a very leftist podcast, and they actually sort of take public policy seriously enough to hold pundits accountable, and I love that. But no, I'm not. I am absolutely not a socialist. Do I think that, as someone who considers himself a conservative, do I think that we should think a little bit more about conserving the legacy of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and, building a better social safety net in this country? Yeah, I think, yeah. The fact that Trump has been president for 4 years, the fact that Donald Trump was ever considered as being president, is a sign that there are a lot of things that need to be seriously reconsidered in this country. And I haven't even begun to do that. I'm more foreign policy focused, as I think this should have indicated. Questions. Do you think the economy will define the 2022 midterms? Probably. I don't know. That is far in the future. I am much more focused on what Biden is going to do in the next 6 months, because I think Biden has an opportunity and has to some degree promised to make that change in U.S. foreign policy that I believe is necessary. The Iran nuclear deal, if the United States gets back into the Iran nuclear deal and has 4 full years to pursue and build upon that deal, then that could be an incredible shift in U.S. policy in terms of saving money on the Middle East, just saving money generally. That could be a tremendous shift away from a lot of really stupid policies. Getting out of Yemen would be fantastic. The United States, after getting into the Middle East, supposedly to save smaller countries from Saddam Hussein, has spent the past 6 years now supporting Saudi Arabia's invasion of a smaller country. I think if that could stop, that would be that's what I'm focused on. Maybe there'll be some more stimulus, that's what I'm focused on. I'm not focused on the 2022 elections yet. Okay. Dada says, does this mean Papa Joe will be finalized tomorrow? Presumably you're talking about Joe Biden becoming certified or whatever as the next president. I expect that to happen tonight. I don't know if it's already happening. Gosh, guys, I haven't looked at the Twitter in an hour and 9 minutes. You guys have really thanked me. Sorry. I have to really thank you for keeping me away from Twitter for an hour and 10 minutes. I have no idea what has been going on. You guys live in the future as far as I'm concerned. Oh gosh, Fadel asks, why is the American right so obsessed with George Soros? That's a big question. He's kind of like the Koch brothers, because he is someone who's spent a tremendous amount of money supporting democratic causes. I sometimes I think overreacted and said, if anybody talks about George Soros as an anti-Semite, and I think that's probably inaccurate. I think it is fair to talk about the work that George Soros does, the work that the Open Society foundations do. I think that is fair to talk about, because it is, a lot of money towards political ends. That's totally fair to talk about. Just as it's fair to talk about the Koch brothers on the right and what they've done. However, I do believe that Koch has become, that talking about George Soros has become a crutch for people who don't really want to talk about, well, I'm not entirely sure that the Open Society Foundation's support of this particular political party in Hungary was the most advantageous. No, it's instead like if it's a stand-in for, Dem cosmopolitan Jews are trying to tell me what to do and replace me. I think the litmus test is if you want to talk about George Soros, know what program you're talking about. If you want to say, George Soros's support through the Open Society Foundation of this, I think is problematic for this reason. Of course, you should absolutely do that. That's completely fair. But if you're up at a rally screaming about George Soros, I just see Hitler, frankly. So yeah. But yeah, why is George Soros? I think it was in 2004. I think it was Soros poured a lot of money very publicly into John Kerry's presidential election. So that's how George Soros sort of entered the demonology of the right wing. I do think that the way George Soros is talked about in a lot of circles makes me really creepy. Makes me really creeps me out, worries me, bothers me. I hope that's an adequate answer. All right. Well, this was fun. This was an hour. Now I want to get back to Twitter. And you can all see you there at Rabo Law, where we will continue to enjoy the descent of my country. I assume. I mean, who knows? Well, an hour has passed. Maybe everything's better, or maybe everything's worse. We can do that. Mariam MS, what shock element do you think Trump will use his final weapon to gain public sentiment, e.g. pedophilia in named government officials, alien intervention? I kind of feel like this was the shock element that Trump was going to use. I don't know. I think this was sort of his last gasp. Could be wrong, though. A lot of people think a war with Iran is possible. I feel like Iran is doing everything it possibly can to avoid that, even though Trump would love it. Local Extreme says, a lot of MAGA apologists are making the case that this is similar to the BLM protests on George Floyd. Do they have a point, or are they lying treason weasels? I don't recall the BLM protests on George Floyd rampaging through the U.S. Capitol building and breaking windows and shooting at Congress people. Did that happen? I don't think so. I think that protest is good. Protest is fine. I have seen, I think, perhaps somewhat excessive demonization. These people need to be seen as terrorists, and they need to be prosecuted under terrorism law, and they're fucking terrorists. And it's like, honestly, I find that that's just, that's basically saying, so the past 20 years of U.S. foreign policy and the way we see and demonize people from other countries, that's just fine. We just need to add these people to the category too. So yeah, I'm not super interested in. Yeah, I mean, the people who broke in, the people we've got pictures of them, they should all be prosecuted for those crimes. But yeah, like I think up until the point where they were on breaking in to the Capitol building, yeah, those were, that's legitimate protest, as was 99.9999999% of the Black Lives Matter protests. This sort of competitive criminalizing of protest acts is not something I'm a fan of. DMT asks, do you think the European Union can be an independent counterweight to the US on the world stage? It's fascinating. I was reading this book from about 20 years ago talking about US dominance, and the main threat that this professor saw to US dominance was the European Union. That was the way it was sort of consciously pitched to a degree back. That was a way that it was consciously pitched to a degree back then. Yeah, I think thus far, the past 20 years have sort of shown that the EU is not yet ready to be a real counterweight to the United States. And that is not something that I see materializing anytime soon. Could it eventually? Absolutely. It's a big place, a lot of capabilities, naturally expanding as well. I could totally see, probably not in the 2020s for sure, but probably not towards the end until the end of the 2030s. But I could see the EU adding Turkey and Russia. So yeah, the EU has tremendous potential. It has had tremendous potential for decades now. It has not been a good decade for the European Union at all. Thank you for the super chat, Mert. That's very generous. Do you have a question? You go. I'll keep talking if there's super chats with questions. Wow, Flash Gordon says Russia is the bear in Revelations with two ribs of a dead animal in its mouth. The ribs are Ukraine and the Caucasus region. I'm not a big fan of prophecy or scripture. I mean, it's fun. It's good. Poetry written hundreds of years ago. Enjoy it if that's your bag. But yeah, I don't give it much credit. One of the reasons is you can see the hoops you have to jump through to make it make any kind of sense. That's a weird name. I don't quite know how to read, so I won't. Could Trump get us in a war with Iran in his last days? I think that's something that we should be worried about, but I think that's also something that got a lot less credible after today. I think that we're going to see. I don't know if Trump's going to be impeached and removed tonight. I don't think that's impossible. But I think it's going to be very difficult for, what's the word I'm looking for? I think it's going to be very difficult for Trump to get anybody behind him. And actually going to war with Iran is something, despite the fact that there's a huge bureaucracy geared and ready for it. I think you need to have some basic legitimacy as a president. And as we come into the last 2 weeks, and the entire world is just absolutely aghast at the spectacle that Donald Trump has created in Washington, D.C., I find it hard to believe that he'd be able to pull off a war on Iran at this point. But who knows? Could he nuke Tehran this time next week? That's a horrifying. I mean, like I feel like I almost said that flippantly, and I want to apologize for seeming to say that flippantly. It is horrifying that is a possibility. This man is a delusional person with more power than anybody else on the planet right now for another 2 weeks, and I don't think we should ever minimize how frightening that is. But especially, now he's sort of backed into a corner. So yeah, it ain't great. But hopefully we'll make it through. And honestly, I think the fiasco today makes it more likely that we'll make it through. Okay, I think I've done an hour and 20 minutes. I think I'm fading in coherence. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for the super chats. That's very generous. My name is Robert Morris. I post every Tuesday at the Mo Freedom Foundation, and I will be free tomorrow, having dealt with this topic. I will be free to work on those posts. On Saturday at noon Eastern time, I will be doing the patrons only live chat. So if you support my crowdfunding thing on Patreon, for patrons, I will be doing the patrons only live newscast at noon on Saturday. So yeah, if you want to get in on that, you've got to sign up for that. That's a lot of fun. There's usually very few people. It's like 5 to 10 people who are in the live chat. So I can deal with every comment. And I basically, there's no way that this channel could deal with everything that folks are interested in hearing about. But at the patrons only newscast every month, I try. So I try to deal with what's happening in all of the many countries that this channel has covered, and whatever else the patrons want me to talk about. So if you're interested in that, you can go to my YouTube homepage and sign up on Patreon for the patrons only newscast. Rob Law. I wrote some books. Twitter is Rob Law. Anyway, thank you all for being here. This has been very psychologically helpful for me. I've been able to vent. I hope you guys got something out of it, and I'm very grateful that you all are here, and I think I have worthwhile things to say. Very grateful for that, and I think my country's going to be okay, and it would be nice if my country acted a little more consistently. For everyone else being okay too. Okay, thank you very much. And with that, I will end the stream.